Greetings all, Dr. Raphael X here with my returning special guest, Dr. Robert Spencer, and we're here to talk about his new book, Holy Hell, which is just by the title you can tell is fascinating. Pretty impressive tome also. Before anything else, let us begin with the sign of the cross, remembering our baptism. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. All right, well, Dr. Spencer, appreciate you coming on again, talking about your new book this time.
Always good to talk to you. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. And this book is a provocative book, but it's very necessary. Holy Hell, Islam's Abuse of Women and the Infidels Who Enabled It. In his work, Dr. Spencer argues that certain interpretations of Islamic tech and legal traditions have contributed to the abuses of women and non-Muslims, which we'll address also. I want to ask you, Dr. Spencer, did this book come because you do talk about doctrine, but you also talk about current events? Were you inspired kind of by the revelations of the whole, the grooming gangs that were discovered there in England? Was that your kind of, did that kind of incite you to write this book?
Well, I've been covering that activity actually in Britain for the last 20 years
Mm,
and hadn't thought to write a book about it. But then what happened was it came to notice on an international level
mm,
to a degree that it never had before. And that was now, I guess, about a year ago when Elon Musk started to call attention to it. And so I thought, now is the time to put together all the evidence in a book and show that this is not something new, but has been going on for many years. And while it's happened in Britain on a scandalous level, it's not just Britain either, but it's a worldwide phenomenon. And so it was when Musk started to put pressure on Keir Starmer's government that I thought this needs a book.
right, right. And you really, I mean, it's pretty much doctrinally justified in Islam. It's just a consequence of their of their doctrine and also from Sharia law, which you make the claim, I believe, because I have this book which is really interesting. It's just Sharia law for non-Muslims. I was just checking that real quick, just confirming it because you mentioned it also, where it says the wife beating in the Quran, right? Which you mentioned the wife beating, and it's kind of enshrined in Sharia law. Isn't that the case? That kind of is justified there?
Wife beating is certainly in the Quran and allowed in Sharia, but there's more. The Quran and Islamic law also allow for taking infidel women and using them as sex slaves. This is something people find absolutely unbelievable, and they don't think it could possibly be true, or they think it's just some extreme interpretation that the vast majority of Muslims reject. Actually, it's in the Quran itself, which means no Muslim actually rejects it, whether they practice it or not. And it is something that is practiced all over the world, as I show in the book, not just in Britain, but in the Islamic world and outside the Islamic world. Christians in Muslim countries such as Egypt and Pakistan are very frequently the targets of this. And this is one of the reasons why this behavior is so self-perpetuating and universal, is that it is justified in core mainstream Islamic teaching.
Right. And shout out to this orphanage I help out with this in Pakistan, this Christian lady who's I won't mention her name, of course, for safety reasons, but she's definitely almost underground helping women who live that concretely in Pakistan. So definitely, even by UN standards, it's not right. By UN standards, women just have less rights than in Muslim countries and non-Muslim countries, which you allude to.
Yeah, well, women are very much second class in Islam. The Quran says that men are superior to women, that men can beat women, that men can have four wives as well as the captives of the right hand, which are the sex slaves I was just discussing. And you can divorce your wife just by saying, I divorce you. Now, if you do that once or twice and you're just getting mad and you calm down later, you can take her back. But if you do it a third time, then she has to go marry somebody else, consummate the marriage, and be divorced by him, and only then can you take her back. This people think this is crazy stuff. It's all in the Quran.
Yeah, it's crazy. There's also been revelations of some prominent Islamic apologists, what they do, the Dawa Bros, who have been, I think it's called Muta. Is it? There's been some women revealing that they basically had one night stands, gotten married, and then gotten divorced. So they kind of use that, marriage and divorce to kind of just fulfill their pretty like fleeting pleasures. It seems like
Yes, that's right. Yeah, muta is pleasure marriage, and it's a marriage with a deadline. And so you say, I'm going to marry you for a weekend. And so it's
like
often
that.
justified in Shiite Islam. Shiite Islam
Mm.
says that Muhammad allowed it and they still practice it. Sunni Islam officially says, no, 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 it was allowed for a temporary period, but then Muhammad stopped it and forbade it. However, there are a lot of people among Sunni Muslims who actually disagree with that idea, and they tend more toward the Shiite view that it's still allowed. And so the Dawa guys that you're talking about, they're Sunnis in Britain, like Mohammed Hijab,
Right.
and but they subscribe to what is generally considered to be more of a Shiite understanding. And it's really just prostitution, essentially. As a matter of fact, you find it most commonly when you're talking about Shiite Islam in seminary towns. It's very interesting because, you would ordinarily think of a seminary as a place where the people there are very serious about the religion, and so they're not going to be engaging in sinful behavior. I mean, of course, everyone's a sinner, but not engaging in such a free and open manner in sinful behavior. But in Islam, or at least in Shiite Islam, there's no problem with this. It's not sinful. And so you have a lot of young men in seminary towns who are away from home for the first time, and there are large numbers of what are essentially prostitutes in these towns like Qom and other places. Qom is the famous Shiite holy city, and they congregate there because they know there'll be a lot of young men there who will marry them for a weekend and give them a so-called dowry. It's essentially just paying for a prostitute. And then after the weekend, the deadline is over and it's all over. The trouble Muhammad Hijab got in, as far as I understand it,
Mm.
is that he was promising to marry some young woman or women. I'm not entirely familiar with the case, but he didn't inform them that he intended it to be a temporary marriage, that he was essentially just going to be using them for sexual pleasure and then throwing them away. So they thought they were entering into a genuine relationship, and he was behaving as if they were prostitutes.
That's tremendous, tremendous. It's
It's
the
all
real
in time.
evil. Yeah, the real evil for them, I guess, is when it's exposed, when it's exteriorized, because it's that the whole
Yeah.
doctrine of taqiyya, which we talked about the last interview we had, which is the kind of that justification of dissimulating, right? The living a double life, which is very
Yeah, it's
shocking,
also humiliating. Sorry, I
humiliating.
didn't
Yeah.
cut you off.
No,
But
no, no.
humiliation is very important in Islam. It's very important because the Quran in chapter 9, verse 29, which is the primary verse calling for warfare against Christians, it says, fight against the people of the book, which is primarily Jews as well as Christians, uh, until they pay the jizya, the tax, with willing submission and feel themselves subdued. So, see, it's a duty before Allah that the Muslims have to make the unbelievers humiliated, to make them understand that they're on a lower plane than the Muslims. And so, Islamic apologists like Muhammad Hijab and Islamic jihadis who are actually violent, they traffic in intimidation to a tremendous degree. This is why we see actually a lot of fake bomb threats from
Mm.
Muslims. They're not just, we think, oh, it was a fake threat. The guy's some kind of nut. No, he was just trying to strike terror in the enemies of Allah and humiliate them without actually going to the extent of killing them all for whatever reason. He might not have had the materials to build a real bomb or something of that kind. So when it comes to getting this exposed, Muhammad Hijab becomes the one humiliated. And this is wrong. This is against the natural order of things. He should be humiliating the kuffar, the unbelievers.
Right.
But when he gets humiliated in front of them, then this is even worse because the Muslims are on a higher plane than the non-Muslims. And so for a Muslim to be humiliated is a tremendous shame, a tremendous dishonor.
Right.
And that is the real problem for him and why this is such a scandal. He doesn't really care about the women. He doesn't really care that it's exposed that he's buying temporary marriages. That's all sanctioned as far as he's concerned. But the humiliation, the big problem.
Yeah, that points to the anthropology of Islam, because correct me if I'm wrong, though. I mean, the Christian view is basically we have a natural dignity rooted in that in the fact that we're created in the image and likeness of God. But for Islam, it's as if there isn't this fundamental dignity. Just a Muslim has more dignity, and you really don't have dignity if you're not Islamic, and much less if you're a woman.
Exactly so. And this is very important. The Quran in chapter 48, verse 29 says, Muhammad is the apostle of Allah. Those who follow him are ruthless to unbelievers, merciful to one another. Now,
Right.
that, it seems to me, is more or less a direct contradiction to the Christian idea that all human beings are made in the image of God and equal in dignity. Instead, you have the Muslims to whom you're merciful and the non-Muslims to whom you are ruthless. They are not on the same plane. They are not the same as the meme goes. The non-Muslims have to be humiliated and the Muslims exalted. And this is the natural order of things, not any idea. There's no idea in Islam of the equal dignity of all people before God or of human beings being created in the image of God. That appears kind of obliquely in the Hadith, but it's not a major Islamic doctrine and does not appear in the Quran. And the idea of the that I'm sketching out here of the Muslims being on a higher level is reinforced much more strongly than any such idea in Islam.
I just want to say, because some people might think you don't need any introduction, Dr. Spencer, but you've been studying this for decades. You've written, I think, over 50 books. So really, you're in the know. So you're the go-to. And even Congress, he had a hearing. I want to mention this. You had a hearing on kind of the growing Islamization. I don't know. That was the general topic. Maybe you could tell the specific topic, the growing Islamization in America, and kind of the more the prevalence of Sharia law, especially in certain states like in Texas and things like that. So that's really interesting. I don't know if you wanted to say anything on that.
Sure. Yeah, in the first place, only 32 books I've written, but
Okay.
get the whole
Yeah.
set. They're available at Amazon. And
Wow.
the hearing was before a House subcommittee about Sharia, about the Constitution and limited government is the House subcommittee, and the hearing was about Sharia. And it was a very interesting experience. Um, the Democrats on the committee, Congressman Raskin of Maryland, I think he's from, and Steve Cohen of Tennessee, as well as Mary Gay Scanlon of Pennsylvania, they all persistently characterized Sharia as if it were personal, private religious law for matters of arbitration in marriage, things like that, totally voluntary. And they characterized any kind of opposition to it as simple religious bigotry and Islamophobia. And they persistently ignored or denied outright any idea that Islam actually teaches warfare against unbelievers, has a political extension, that Sharia has a political extension as well as a religious one, and that it's not a matter of bigotry or hatred to oppose a political ideological system that is violent, supremacist, aggressive, and expansionist, and that it denies basic rights to those who don't hold to it.
That's right. That's right. And what's interesting is a lot of turning to your book, a lot of what the left hates in Christianity exists exponentially in Islam. For example, like modesty. Let's do women, for example, which you allude to. Women are totally covered up. And maybe you give the origins in that, because I'm not sure if that had to do with Muhammad's kind of insecurity with his concubines or wives, but women, and in some places you have even the eyes covered up, where it's a total covering. So why is this kind of this extreme view and this modesty, if you will, this disordered modesty in women?
Yeah, it's interesting because there is a meme going around I see it every now and again. I would expect that you've seen it, but if you haven't, you will eventually. And it's got two photos side by side. One is of a Roman Catholic nun, and the other is of a woman in hijab. And it says, if you've got a problem with one of these but not the other, then
Oh,
you're
yes.
a racist, bigoted Islamophobe. And it's a trick, that meme. It's a sleight of hand, so to speak, because really there's no comparison between the two. A nun takes religious orders voluntarily. I mean, enters into a convent and takes religious vows, I mean to say, voluntarily.
Right.
And nobody is forcing her to do it. And nobody is saying all women have to dress this way in Christianity. Certainly, Christianity teaches modesty, but modesty is going to change in its specific expression from
Right.
culture to culture and time to time. Whereas in Islam, I can give you numerous examples of women who've been brutalized or even killed for not wearing hijab. It is something that's forced on the basis of terror and fear that if you don't wear it, you could get beaten, you could get killed, you could get ostracized from the community. And so there's just no comparison between the two. The basis of the hijab in Islam is in the Quran that says chapter 24 verse 31 women should draw their veils over their bosoms. Chapter 33 verse 59 says this as well, says that they do it so that they are not molested. And
Mm.
so the unspoken corollary of that, or the flip side, is that well, if you don't veil, then you can lawfully be molested. And this is actually how Muslims in Europe and increasingly in North America have been treating non-Muslim women because they figure, well, they're not veiled. And so they're signaling that they actually want this. And so they attack them. Now, all this comes from various hadiths in which Muhammad first mandates that his wives be veiled and then mandates it for all Muslim women. And the idea is that it's the responsibility of the women to make sure that the men are not tempted. In Christianity, we have the idea of custody of the eyes, that you're tempted by seeing women. Well, look at something else. Look away. It's up to you to exercise self-control and to develop the virtue of chastity on the basis of that self-control. But there's no such idea in Islam. It doesn't exist. If the women have to cover themselves, and if they don't, the men are perfectly justified in raping them.
Right.
And so this is another justification for the rape gangs that we've seen in Britain and elsewhere, that the women are not covered because if they want to ward off being attacked, then they have to cover up. And to their everlasting shame, actually some Western leaders now have started to say that, well, our women are going to have to start dressing like the Muslim women so as not to inflame the young Muslim men with temptation. Nobody's telling the young Muslim men to control themselves, least of all Islam itself.
Yeah, why do you think there is this capitulation to that, and why are there's it seems like there's this trend like with Lily J. I'm sure you've heard of her. These shorts I've seen, these shorts always come on my feed of Muslimas. I think that's how you call them, Muslim women, and even they're doing dawah with hijabs, like they're letting foreigners for them, which are European natives, put on hijabs, and it's all positive. They're all loving it and things like that. But there seems to be. And I don't know because it's this effeminate, we're living in a effeminate, secularist, and sadly, post-Christian era, where it seems like the feminists are finding attractiveness in this strong masculinism, in this, disordered patriarchy, if you will, in Islam. Is what's happening here?
Well, I think you actually hit on something very important there, that feminists are rejecting Christianity, rejecting the idea that they call patriarchy of males being in charge or males having a certain kind of headship in the family. But then they go and embrace a caricature of it that is even more virulently anti-female and even more assertive and aggressive about males being the head of the family. Now, why on earth would they do that? Well, it's a complicated question, of course, but I do think that at least in some cases, it emanates from exactly that disorder, that they're longing for what they've rejected, because it is the natural order of things. And this is not to say men are superior to women or should beat women or anything of the kind. You study the famous chapter of St. Paul's letter to the Ephesians, which is read during the marriage ceremony, or at least it's read during the Orthodox marriage ceremony. The how does it go? I don't have the Bible right with me, but the famous passage: "Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Wives, be submissive to your husbands," and that drives feminists crazy. Wives, be submissive to your husbands, and they never consider the fact that the same passage says, "Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church," which is a tremendous self-emptying and the great divine humility in taking on man and the sacrificing himself to open heaven for us. This is a mutuality that is completely absent from Islam. And so that is the natural order of things, where you do have a hierarchy, but it's not a hierarchy of domination or of exploitation or of terror or anything of the kind. But in the absence of it, in the explicit rejection of it, there is a certain longing in the soul for it, because that's how we were created. And so they see this caricature of it, oh, excuse me, especially at a time when so many Christians, including leaders of the church, are so embarrassed by this and abandoning it and not teaching it. And then they see in Islam, they got no problem. They never retreat if even 1 inch. They always teach what they're all about. And they think, well, that's what I want. And so they don't even realize that they're contradicting themselves. They're just answering a deeper longing within their own soul.
Right, right. Yeah, no, that's really interesting. Yeah, and it seems like yeah, there's an attractiveness to that. But what about like I can kind of sympathize because I think a lot of Muslims they conflate secularism with Christianity, and it's almost blurred, sadly. It's almost blurred in many instances where there's just a wholehearted embrace with mainstream or mainline in many ways, at least in the Catholic Church, the hierarchy. I mean, it's just a total embrace of the modern world. And Muslims, they conflate both of those. And so I can understand, in a sense, a Muslim who's in a secular society seeing women, the feminism, for example, and wanting to go back to more traditional values. I think there are Muslims that are kind of well-intentioned in a sense, and if you agree with this trend, let me know. But I find back in the home countries of many of these Muslim countries, they're becoming uh, more moderate as opposed to the European countries where immigrants are going. There's more hardline Muslims. Is that the case, or I'm not sure. It seems to me that's what's happening. At least I don't know.
Well, yeah, there are a lot of things happening in it's a very large area, but one of the general things that we can pinpoint is in a lot of places where Islamic law has been very strictly enforced for a long time, people are thoroughly sick of it
Hmm.
and it's being relaxed. Most notably Saudi Arabia, where they've been very hardline for a long time. But now, over the last few years, the Saudi government has actually started to lift some of the Islamic restrictions on things or reinterpret them so they allow women to drive now and things like that. And the idea is to make Saudi Arabia more attractive for foreign investment because they realize that the oil-based economy may be on its way out, that Certainly, the whole establishment left wants to abandon it and go to electric and solar and so on. And so they don't want to end up being impoverished as they were before they struck oil. They want to diversify their economy. And so they're getting rid of some of the least appealing aspects of it. But that also coincides. So the people, in many cases, are very happy that for that to happen because, well, a lot of Muslims don't want to live under Islamic law any more than anybody else because it is so draconian. And so they're happy to leave it. In Iran, of course, it's still very strictly enforced. And that's one of the reasons why the people hate the regime. And they're not only just hating the regime, but the regime being so closely identified with Islam itself is leading people to leave Islam in large numbers. And a survey a few years back was shocking, showed that less than 40% of the people in Iran now identify as Muslim.
Oh wow.
That's so it's officially 99% Islamic, but it's been so unpleasant for the people to live under Muslim rule all these years that most of the population has now abandoned Islam. Now, then on the other hand, you have the migrants to Europe.
Mm.
The migrants to Europe are a variety of people, of course, but one of the groups you have are people who are going there because they're poor in their home countries and they understand that Europe is rich and they want to live comfortable lives. So they're what's known as economic migrants. But there are also migrants, and this is very little noted, but it's quite clear from numerous sort of man on the street interviews, statements of the migrants themselves. They are emigrating for the sake of Allah, which is a concept we find in the Quran. Chapter 4, verse 100 states that those who emigrate for the sake of Allah can be sure of a great reward from Allah.
Mm.
So, what does it mean to emigrate for the sake of Allah? You're emigrating like Muhammad did when he moved from Mecca to Medina, and he became for the first time a political and spirit military leader as well as a spiritual one. So he takes on political and military power for the first time. If you emigrate for the sake of Allah to a non-Muslim society, you're committing yourself to working to bring Islam there and ultimately to gain political power there. This is why we see such small groups of Muslims in the West often wielding political power to a proportion beyond their numbers. Like we have a very small percentage of Muslims in the United States, and yet they got three congressmen, not only Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, but Andre Carson, who's much lower profile. And they are running for office at all levels of the US government uh, in order to gain political power and increase their influence beyond all proportion to the actual Muslim population in the country. And this is because Islam is political, but this is all part of what it means to emigrate for the sake of Allah. So, in many Muslim countries, in some, you have a lot of people who are sick of Islam and they are going to not observe it as much as they can get away with. Whereas a lot of the people coming to the West are actually very serious about Islam
Hmm.
and are trying to bring it here.
Right, right. Interesting. I did see a poll about, I think it was 85% in the UK, I believe, or more. They wanted to the establishment of Sharia law kind of more generalized in the UK. So I was shocked about that. But yeah, that's really interesting. So they're coming to a new country and they basically want to make it a dump like from where they came from. Unfortunately, that's really interesting. Um, but so the political kind of the political takeover, if you will, is that kind of like because I've heard the concept of a silent or a Pacific, if you will, jihad. Kind of is that like a political jihad? I mean, their end goal is to kind of to take over. Is that right? Would you kind of mention that?
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And at jihadwatch.org, which is my own website, I track jihad activity in the United States and around the world every day. And I've seen a sharp increase over the last couple of years in Muslims openly saying in Europe and in America that they're here to take over. And this is because, as I've explained, Islam has this supremacist imperative. They consider it to be part of their religion. And the left in America and in Britain and all over continental Europe is in total denial about this and refuses to look at the evidence that this is exactly what the objective is. But if they really want to continue to ignore it, then we're going to look in Britain at what life will be like for the non-Muslims in 50 years or 100 years. It's going to be like the Coptic Christians in Egypt or the Christians in Pakistan, a small minority denied basic rights by a massive Muslim majority. And the small minority in Egypt, remember, those Christians are the indigenous people of the land, just like the people in Britain.
Right, right. No, that makes sense. And would you say like w how would you respond to people who say like, oh, Dubai, Qatar, these are Muslim nations that are not really follow that trend. Are they are they successful? It seems like they are successful despite of Islam, not with Islam, like kind of because of their rejection of Islam. Like, why are there Muslim countries? Like, these are countries that are, I mean, their airports are amazing. I travel. I've been to Pakistan. I've been to the Middle East, and you go to the airports like Qatar, and it's like it's impressive. And it does seem like, even though it could be at surface level, it does seem like there's harmony there. I've met Catholics there, so it's yeah. What do you say to that when people bring those countries up?
Well, first thing, the Catholics that you met in Qatar, were they Qatari or were they
Other
foreign?
Filipinos.
Yeah. The Qataris recently I know Tucker Carlson was talking about the Christians in Qatar and comparing them favorably to the situation of Christians in Israel. But
Hmm.
he didn't mention the fact that there aren't any Qatari Christians. They
Hmm.
are foreign workers
Hmm.
who go there for economic reasons, and the Qataris accommodate them to a certain degree, but to a very restricted degree. For one thing, there's a Catholic church there, if my memory serves me right, and it doesn't have any sign outside that it's a church. No cross, nothing, because Islam does not allow outward display of the non-Muslims' religions, and especially on the Arabian Peninsula. It is forbidden because Muhammad said, I will ban the Jews and Christians from Arabia. And the people on the Arabian Peninsula have taken that very seriously. This is why no non Muslim religious expression is allowed in Saudi Arabia, even now while they're modernizing. So, Qatar, yeah, they want to make money and they do it very well. But at the same time, they are spending a lot of that money in the United States in funding American universities. Now, what are they buying when they fund American universities? They're not just giving the money out of the kindness of their heart and saying use it how you think best. They want Middle Eastern studies programs that teach a rosy, whitewashed version of Islam. And that's what you get in colleges and universities all around the country. They want the people to hate Israel and to support the Palestinian jihad. When October 7th, the jihad massacre happened in Israel and 1,200 Israelis were murdered, the American universities immediately started to protest and agitate in favor of Hamas. Why? Because this is what they've been taught, that Israel is a terrible oppressor and that Hamas is in the right. And they were taught that by professors who are funded from Qatar.
Hmm.
So this is what they are doing with the money. Also, there's the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood is an international organization that is dedicated to imposing Sharia, Islamic law, around the world and ultimately to restoring the caliphate. It was actually founded in Egypt in 1928 by people who were angry because the last caliph had been deposed in 1924 in secular Turkey and they wanted to restore the caliphate. The caliph is the successor of Muhammad as the political, military, and spiritual leader of the Muslims. And the idea of the caliphate, although this is theory, this was never fully realized in practice, but it's still a very powerful theory. The idea was that the caliphate is the whole sole legitimate government to which Muslims worldwide owe allegiance. And it transcends all other allegiances on earth. So you don't say I'm a Pakistani or I'm an Iranian or I'm an Afghan or I'm an Egyptian. You say I'm a member of the Caliphate of the Ummah. Now, the Ottoman Empire was the last caliphate, and it's gone. And it's been 100 years now since there's been a caliph. So the jihad terror groups around the world have it as one of their primary goals that what they want to do is destroy the existing governments of the world so that an Islamic caliphate can replace them. And so the unity of the Muslims can be restored.
Right.
And then they will be able to wage offensive jihad, which is the province of the caliph alone. Right now, we're only seeing defensive jihad. So the idea is to restore the caliphate so that they have this unified Muslim government. Now, that's the Muslim Brotherhood. That's the whole idea of the Muslim Brotherhood, to destroy existing governments and replace them with Sharia, and ultimately to merge all the Sharia states into one caliphate. The Muslim Brotherhood is active in the United States. All the major Muslim organizations in the United States are linked in one way or another to the Muslim Brotherhood. And the Muslim Brotherhood, according to a captured internal document, states the brothers must understand that their goal in America is a kind of grand jihad in eliminating and destroying Western civilization from within and sabotaging its miserable house by their hands, that is, the hands of the people in Western civilization, and the hands of the believers, so that it falls and Allah's religion is victorious over other religions. That's the Muslim Brotherhood program for the United States. And all the major Muslim groups are on board, and they're all Muslim Brotherhood. So that where are they getting the money for all this? From Qatar. So that's Qatar. Now, it's true, it's not a strict Islamic state like Iran because it wants to attract foreign money in order to give it to the Muslim Brotherhood for precisely this purpose. The UAE and Dubai is part of the United Arab Emirates. It's a little different. They really are just in it for the money. And we have to understand that just because somebody bears the name of Muslim doesn't mean that they're always going to be acting to further Islam or in accord with Islam, just as Christians don't always act in accord with the teachings of Christianity. And so the UAE is a state that is chasing some pragmatic imperatives right now that they want to make money as well. There is a downside, though. It's not like they're completely secular. Abu Dhabi and Dubai, that become, I mean, Dubai, the has become kind of a resort area, and people go there on vacation.
Mhm.
But there have been women, Western women there who've been arrested for being raped. Because, see, here again, what we were discussing before, it's the woman's fault if a man is tempted. It's the woman's responsibility. So she has to cover up so that he's not tempted. And if she gets raped, she has failed to stop him from being tempted. So she goes to prison.
Right.
75% of the women in Pakistan are in prison because they were raped. And that's a statistic that comes from a Muslim women's organization that is working to change all that. But
Right.
that's what happens all too often to women in Dubai. So yeah, they have a an inviting secular facade, and certainly they do not enforce Islamic law to its fullest degree, but they do enforce it to a degree much more than most Westerners realize.
Yeah, yeah, maybe in a future video. I don't know if you have a book on eschatology, but really the what's happening now, and we can talk about it in another video, but kind of the unification of Islam under the Caliphate, the Mahdi, it seems like those times are near at least. There's a very interesting book called The Islamic Antichrist. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's actually a
Yeah, that's Joel
comedian,
Richardson, right?
Joel Richardson, yeah, which is I
Yeah,
don't know.
Joel's a good guy. Yeah.
Yeah, is that his real name? What I understood is his pen name. It's not his actual name, but I
Oh,
don't know
well, I
if I
can't
understood it
comment
right.
on that, but Joel Richardson is a guy you can find by that name,
Oh,
and
okay.
the
Okay,
author of
maybe I
that book.
misread. Maybe I misread. I thought that
So,
because he talked about how dangerous it was, but very fascinating book. But yeah, we can get into that some other time because the parallels there are really amazing. And I was just kind of reminded of that when you were talking about kind of everything happening. But yeah, turning to
let me
women.
give you just
Yeah, no,
one.
yeah,
Excuse me.
please.
I'm sorry to interrupt again,
No, no,
but
no.
when you're talking about Islamic eschatology, there
Yeah.
is one thing that I often like to mention that I think your listeners, your viewers will find very interesting and that isn't often remarked upon. There is a hadith that is a tradition of Muhammad's words and deeds. That's what the hadith are. There's a hadith in which Muhammad says that there is nobody more hateful in the sight of Allah on the day of judgment than the one who calls himself the King of Kings.
Wow.
So you see the Islamic idea of the end times, where Jesus is a Muslim prophet who comes back and destroys Christianity, he breaks the cross, and so on. This is completely opposed to Christian eschatology.
Right.
And it is the bad guys are the good guys and vice versa.
Yeah.
And
That's
the end times as the Islam envisions it, the worst person is going to be the King of Kings.
That's right. That's going to be their false prophet, which is and their Isa is going to be our false prophet. Their Isa is going to be the when he comes back saying, "No, no, you guys got it all wrong. I wasn't God actually. I was just a man." And that's going to be
Yeah,
their
that's the
Jesus.
definition of Antichrist,
The
as
definition
far
of
as
Antichrist
conspiracies
is so the
are concerned.
Mahdi. So Joel Richardson makes that argument that the Mahdi would actually be the Antichrist, and the prophet that we proclaim, um, not the prophet, the speaker for the Antichrist. I think is a I forget the name. The precursor of the Antichrist will actually be their Isa or vice versa. I forget, but yes, very the parallels are really amazing, and it's
Mhm.
very interesting, and it's almost as if Satan through the religious deception, which is we in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, it says that the Antichrist will come and deceive people through some type of religious deception. So that deception seems like, Islam at least, because it's under the veil of righteousness. It's almost like you see on the outside, these people are very righteous.
Yes.
It's deceiving in that sense. It's not explicitly evil. You're seeing people in robes. I mean, you're seeing people modestly dressed. You're seeing people pray, right? Praying in
Yeah.
postures that are very, adoring postures. So it's very interesting in that sense. But also, what about this turning to women? How do you explain that Muhammad's his parents, correct me if I'm wrong, his parents are in hell, right? Both his mother and his father, or at least he implies that they're in hell because he didn't want to pray for them. But the Virgin Mary, she is the most exalted woman in the Quran. So how do we explain how does that make sense?
Well, his parents are in hell because they're not believers in the one God. But there's so much ambiguity and contradiction in the Hadith because it's all later traditions. And so there are also traditions that say where Muhammad says that every believer who goes to paradise will be able to take people with him, certain number of people with him, including his parents. So they may not be. But there are numerous passages of the Quran that says even if your father or your brother rejects this, then you have to reject them. That, for example, there's a very famous passage in chapter 60 of the Quran, verse 4, where it says Abraham is an excellent example for the believers. Now, that's very big. The excellent example means a model for emulation because Muhammad is called that in chapter 33, verse 21 of the Quran. And Muhammad is the model of emulation for every activity for a believing Muslim. If Muhammad did it, it's good and should be imitated. And so to say that about Abraham is very big, but then there's a big exception, which there are no exceptions for Muhammad. Chapter 60, verse 4 goes on to say that Abraham is an excellent example when he says to his father, there will be enmity and hatred between us and you forever because you do not worship the one God.
Hmm.
And so that's what you got to emulate Abraham in, hating your father if he's not a Muslim.
Hmm. Wow.
You don't emulate him, and it goes on to say, but he's not a model of emulation when he says, but I'll pray for you. So it's even worse. You don't imitate him when he says to pray for your unbelieving father.
Wow. Yeah, that's really shocking. That's really shocking. And Dr. Spencer, just kind of wrapping it up a little bit. Someone has asked me, and I was thinking this is perfect for this interview. So the men, because I mean, it seems like what is exalted is lust. Lust is exalted. Someone told me Islam is a sexy religion, and I think that's why the first followers find it attractive in many ways. The concubines, the booty you get, but really why? So when men die, they get the hooties, right? The women, and do women believe that they will be one of the hooties when they die? What do they get?
That's ambiguous. Islam does not actually say anything. The Quran
Mm,
doesn't say anything. The Hadith doesn't say anything about what paradise will be like for the women. And so there was recently a Muslim woman wearing hijab who made a video, and she said that uh, a lot of Muslim women are not really happy about the prospect of paradise because they think they're going to be watching their husbands having sex with these houris for all eternity. And so, what is paradisal about that? And this woman explains that they're actually going to get a lot of stuff. They're going to get jewels and fine clothes and all these things. It's a physical place,
right,
Muslim paradise, and she acts as if this is good. And it just reminded me of Charles de Foucault,
right.
who I believe is a Roman Catholic saint, if I'm not mistaken,
Mhm.
19th century Catholic missionary to North Africa. Now, in his younger years, he had been a libertine. And then he had a religious conversion and became a monk. And he went to North Africa to live among the Muslims and to try to bring them to Christ. And he explained that he knew that Islam was not true when he saw what it taught as paradise, because he had tasted the pleasures of the flesh and he knew they were not the highest good. And he knew that they did not satisfy the longings of the human soul. And so he knew that Islam's degraded sensuality showed that it was a false religion.
Right.
And I think there's a great deal of wisdom in that that has never actually been confronted by any Muslim spokesman because they can't really say these are these are descriptions of something in human terms that will be actually far beyond that because literalism is mainstream in Islam. A lot of people would call them a heretic if they said something like that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And if just the last, just to answer criticisms, because there are people I know people who are fans of yours. I know people who are critics of yours, as I'm sure you do, of course, of yourself. So I'm sure you get a lot of flack for what you do, which kudos to you for your courage. How do you reply to people who are, I'm sure the main criticism is, oh, you're just generalizing. You're unfairly generalizing about Islam. That's what your work does. What do you say? I'm guessing that's the principal criticism.
Yeah, I've heard that, but I think it's kind of ridiculous because um, I am merely actually, most of my work is just reporting on what the Quran says and then how it's understood by mainstream Islamic scholars and how it's applied in the world by actual Muslims. And so they can't really deny that. They say, well, yeah, you're ignoring all the wonderful, peaceful, tolerant aspects. And I say, okay, where are they? Show me.
Right.
What am I exactly missing? Where is there a country in the world today where non-Muslims enjoy full equality of rights with Muslims? There isn't one. At very least, there are restrictions on proselytizing for the Christians, but not for the Muslims, like in Turkey. And so uh, that's one problem. And the other is, where is this form of Islam? I look around in the world and I see there are many Muslims who don't follow all these teachings of the Quran that we've been discussing and all the other noxious aspects of it. But I do not see an actual form of Islam that teaches an understanding of Islam that allows for equality between men and women, that allows for the full dignity and rights of non-Muslims, or the freedom of speech. Instead, I see all the sects and all the schools of jurisprudence teach the death penalty for blasphemy, teach the inequality of men with women, and the inequality of Muslims with non-Muslims. So I say, show me a form of Islam that actually teaches tolerance and equality and peace.
That's right.
Well, I've never seen one.
So you're telling me
People
it's not a
about,
religion of peace. So that's
yeah. And people like to, sometimes they say, oh, well, what about the Ismaili Shia or the Ahmadiyya? And these are, we can get into the specifics of those examples. I would dispute both of them. But even if we granted that they are peaceful, tolerant versions of Islam, they represent a very small minority of Muslims worldwide, 1%, 2%. And so, what if I said, that some Protestant group that was 1% of Christians worldwide is the real thing. And we should just discount all the rest. You would say, well, that's stupid. You
right.
should look at the major forms of it and that most people hold and the ones that most people have held traditionally throughout history. And that will give you a much more representative idea. Well, that's what I'm doing.
That's right. I guess the Muslims expect you to be like them with the taqiyya. You're supposed to dissimulate the reality and,
Yeah.
portray it for what it's not. So very good. Well, holy hell, if I could just ask you this last question. I love the title. I thought that because I heard this, that everyone goes to hell. Even Muslims go to hell.
Yeah.
Is that the case? But then they're extracted
Yeah.
from hell.
Yeah, there's a hadith to that effect. But this book is actually not about hell as
Right.
such or about the what happens after death for Muslims. It's about Islam's mistreatment of women
That's right.
and how it's justified by Islamic te texts and teachings. And that this mistreatment of women, the sex slavery, the other things we discussed before, they're all in the Quran. They're all allowed by Islam. And this is why this is going on in Britain and elsewhere and why we're going to see more of it because everybody's still in total denial about it.
Well, guys, get this book. This book is excellent. It's also Islam's abuse of women and the infidels who enable it, which is really, we cannot allow. We have to speak up, basically, which what you're doing, and that's really excellent. So, guys, get this book. It's very like all of Dr. Spencer's readings is very accessible. I mean, you write profoundly, but in a way that is not it's not difficult to read. So that's really awesome, and that's a gift actually. Well, thanks for coming on. We appreciate you. Hopefully we'll like to have you in for your next book, which will probably be next month. No, I'm just
As a
kidding.
matter of fact, you're right. It is coming
Oh,
next.
really?
The tragedy of Islam, failure and excuses, and
Oh,
that's
wow. So,
all
wow.
about how Islam doesn't work.
Yeah,
It doesn't make your life better, and it doesn't make societies better.
that's right.
And I approve both in that book.
Awesome, awesome. So, yes, hopefully hope to have you on again. And well, thanks for coming on. And God bless you all for listening. And thank you very much.